desk, and I think it's very reasonable that we go ahead and take care of some of these things that would be acceptable. And so for that reason, I would ask unanimous consent that amendment number 1203 be brought before us for its immediate consideration.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Senator from Iowa.
I'm not going to make any unanimous consent requests. I just want to speak about a piece of legislation that I hope to get up before we finish the bill on immigration. This is a Grassley-Kirk amendment number 1299, and I'm having a difficult time getting it put in place so we can get it brought up. I believe that there's a lack of understanding of what my amendment does, and I think I'll take this time to explain it so you fully understand it and I can get it to a roll call vote. I want to thank Senator Kirk for joining me on this amendment as a co-sponsor. This amendment would address language in the bill that creates a convoluted and ineffective process for determining whether a foreign national in a street gang should be deemed inadmissible or be deported. I offered a similar amendment in committee because I believe this to be such a dangerous loophole that requires closing. My amendment even had the support of 2 members of the group of 8. Specifically, in order to deny entry or remove a gang member, Section 3701 of the bill requires that Department of Homeland Security prove a foreign national, 1, had a prior federal felony conviction for drug trafficking or violent crime, 2, has knowledge that the gang is continuing to commit crimes, and 3, has acted in furtherance of gang activity. Even if all of these provisions could be proven, under the bill, the Secretary could still issue a waiver, one of many opportunities for the Secretary of Homeland Security to just forget about what the legislation says. As such, the proposed process is limited only to criminal gang members with prior federal drug trafficking and federal violent crime convictions, and does not, can you believe this, does not include state convictions like rape and murder. The trick here is that while the bill wants you to believe there is strong provision for nationals who have federal felony drug convictions or violent crime convictions are already subject to deportation if they're already here or denied entry as being inadmissible. So the gang provision written in this bill adds nothing to current law and obviously will not be used. It is at best a feel-good measure to say that we're being tough on criminal gangs while really doing nothing to remove or deny entry to criminal gang members. It is easier to prove that someone is a convicted drug trafficker than both a drug trafficker and a gang member. So, as currently written, why would this provision ever be used? Simply put, it would not be used. My amendment would strike this do-nothing provision and issue a new, clear, simple standard to address the problem of gang members. My amendment would strike this do-nothing provision and create a process to address criminal gang members where the Secretary of Homeland Security must prove, 1, criminal street gang membership, and 2, that the person is a danger to the community. Once the Secretary proves these 2 things, the burden shifts then, as it should, to the foreign national to prove that either he is not dangerous, not a street gang, or not in a street gang, or that he did not know that the group was a street gang. It is straightforward and will help remove dangerous criminal gang members. My amendment also eliminates the possibility of a waiver. under my amendment, the vast majority of people here illegally that could be excluded based upon criminal gang membership would be able to appeal that determination to an immigration judge. And even if they are found to be a gang member, if they can show they're not a danger to society, they can gain status. This gives the Secretary, and in the event they appeal an immigration judge, the ability to make these two determinations before denying entry or starting deportation. It is a real solution to dangerous criminal gang members who are either here in the country now seeking legal status or who are attempting to enter from abroad. I urge my colleagues to look at this amendment, hopefully get it on the list of issues we can discuss and vote on before we have final passage. To kind of summarize, the current bill is simply a feel-good measure that has very limited impact. It will rarely be used because it is written in a way with too many loopholes, and even if it is, the Secretary can waive the deportation. And I think we ought to be emphasizing a greater extent how many waivers there are in this bill that really makes this bill too much delegation to the Secretary, and we ought to be legislating more in these areas and making more determinations here instead of putting it up to the Secretary. A vote against my amendment is a vote against common-sense legislation to address criminal gang members. Now, I'm sure somebody's going to argue that this might be too high of a burden. My amendment simply requires that the Secretary make the initial determination for purposes of admissibility. Under my amendment, the vast majority of people here illegally that could be excluded based upon criminal gang membership would be able to appeal that determination to an immigration judge. So there is review of these decisions to deny status if the Secretary believes the individual to be a gang member. Criminal street gangs, as everyone knows, are dangerous, and they survive by robbing their community of safety. They're involved in drug trafficking, human trafficking, and prostitution. The way the bill deals with criminal gang members would allow gang members to simply say they are no longer a gang member with no further determination, and they would be able to gain admission. In reality, then, it is hard to walk away from a gang, and some will just claim that they did gain status. The only way to prevent gang members from gaming the system is through my amendment. It provides the Secretary and immigration judges discretion they need. And even if they are a gang member, if they can show that they're not a danger to society, they can gain status. This is a reasonable standard that allows the alien to argue that they are not a gang member and or dangerous. There is a precedent in the Immigration Code related to group membership as a bar, namely membership or association with a terrorist organization. Criminal gangs, although not legally terrorist organizations, can be just as dangerous as terrorists. Why would we not want to give the Secretary this authority? This bill provides sweeping waiver authority and discretion to the Secretary to make all sorts of decisions. So I don't know why the sponsors would oppose discretion to the Secretary to deny gang member admission. A vote against this amendment, if I get it brought up, is a vote to allow dangerous gang members a path into our country. Now, some may argue that it should be tied to some sort of criminal conviction. Well, criminal gang members are not often convicted of a crime of gang membership. In fact, the federal crime of being a gang member is almost never used. To only limit gang member restrictions to those convicted would be a huge loophole, given the difficulty of prosecuting someone for simply gang membership. The underlying bill doesn't even consider state-level convictions for gang membership, as my amendment would. Simply put, my amendment will help prevent gang members from getting into this country, and the bill will not. Only before yielding the floor now, I just hope that we can get this amendment on the list to be voted upon. I yield the floor.
President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Yes.
President,
Senator from Vermont.
President, I ask consent to call the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
President, I yield to the distinguished senator from Hawaii.
Thank you. Mr. President, I rise to speak on my amendment, Hirono number 1504, co-sponsored by Senators Murray, Murkowski, Boxer, Gillibrand, Cantwell, Stabenow, Klobuchar, Warren, Baldwin, Mikulski, Landrieu, Shaheen, and Leahy. I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment.
I object.
Objection is heard.
Thank you. So noted. To continue, Mr. President, the immigration bill clearly, if inadvertently, disadvantages women who are trying to immigrate to the United States. S-744 reduces the opportunities for immigrants to come under the family-based green card system. The new merit-based point system for employment green cards will significantly disadvantage women who want to come to this country, particularly unmarried women. Many women overseas do not have the same educational or career advancement opportunities available to men in those countries. This new merit-based system will prioritize green cards for immigrants with high levels of education or experience. By favoring these immigrants, the bill, in effect, cements into U.S. immigration law unfairness against women. That's not the way to go. The bill inadvertently restricts the opportunities available to women across the globe. Currently, approximately 70% of immigrant women come to this country through the family-based system. Employment-based visas favor men over women by nearly a 4-to-1 margin as they place a premium on male-dominated fields like engineering and computer science. But across the globe, women do not have the same educational or career opportunities as men. Immigrant women make many contributions and positive impacts to communities. Economically, women are increasingly the primary breadwinners in immigrant families. They often bring additional income, making it more likely for the family to open small businesses, purchase homes. In addition, women provide stability and permanent roots as they are more likely to follow through on the citizenship application process for themselves and their families. Ensuring that women have an equal opportunity to come here is not an abstract policy cause to me. When I was a young girl, my mother brought my brothers and me to this country in order to escape an abusive marriage. My life would be completely different if my mother wasn't able to take on that courageous journey. I want women like her, women like my mother, who don't have the opportunities to succeed in their own countries, to be able to build a better life for themselves here. The Hirono-Murray-Murkowski Amendment evens the playing field for women. This amendment would establish a Tier 3 merit-based point system that would provide a fair opportunity for women to compete for merit-based green cards. Complementary to the high-skilled Tier 1 and lower-skilled Tier 2, the new Tier 3 would include professions commonly held by women so as not to limit women's opportunity for economic-focused immigration to this country. This system would provide 30,000 Tier 3 visas and would not reduce the visas available in the other two merit-based tiers, while maintaining the overall cap on merit-based visas. This amendment is supported by We Belong Together, Women for Common Sense Immigration Reform. by the Asian American Justice Center, the National Domestic Workers Association, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, Church World Service, Family Values at Work, National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, Moms Rising, National Immigration Law Center, American Immigration Lawyers Association, National Organization of Women, Center for Community Change, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, the Episcopal Church, Unitarian Universalist Association, United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, Catholic Charities USA, Caring Across Generations, Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Sisters of Mercy, Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, AFL-CIO, the International Union, United Automobile, Aerospace, and Agricultural Implement Workers of America, National Council of La Raza, the United Methodist Church, National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance, Hispanic Federation, Service Employees International Union, Immigration Equality Action Fund, Out for Immigration, Sojourners, Communication Workers of America, of AFL-CIO. I believe that our amendment would address the disparities for women in the new merit-based system, and the dozens of organizations that I just mentioned believe likewise. Let's work together to improve the new merit-based immigration system and make this bill better for women. I yield back my time. I note the absence of a quorum, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Please.
Yes.
Mr. President.
Senator from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. President. I didn't mean that. Thank you. Mr. President, I wanted to come here today and talk a little bit about this immigration bill as we head the end of this week, because we're obviously hearing from many people outside of the building that are concerned about this issue. And I think it's important to make a few things clear as we head into next week and what I hope will be final passage of this measure. First, let me describe how this program works, because I think this is, immigration is complicated. It can sometimes even be confusing. We throw around these terms here in the building and we assume that everybody back home understands what they mean. So I wanted to explain, and the way I'm going to explain it is how this bill will work if we pass the amendment filed by Senators Hoeven and Corker, which I believe would pass and should pass with significant bipartisan support. And here's how it would work. First, let's describe the problem we have today. The problem we have in the United States today is, number one, we have a broken legal immigration system. We have a system of legal immigration. About 1 million people a year come here legally, but the system is broken because it's designed, for example, solely based on primarily family reunification, which, by the way, is how my parents came in 1956. The problem is the world has changed, and as a result, because we now live in a global economy where we're competing for talent, not just workforce, we need to have more of a merit-based and career-based immigration system, and this bill would do that. It would move it in that direction. We have a broken legal immigration system, by the way, because it's cumbersome and it's complicated and it's bureaucratic. You really have to lawyer up to legally immigrate to the United States, especially in certain categories. In particular, if you look at the agricultural sector, there is no reliable, sustainable way for agriculture to get foreign labor. And by and large, while there are Americans that will do labor in the agriculture industry, there's a shortage of Americans, a significant shortage of Americans that will do labor, that will work in the agriculture industry. And we don't have a program for agriculture that works for people to come legally here. But the jobs are there, so people are coming illegally. So we have a broken legal immigration system, and that has to be fixed. That has to be modernized. And this bill does that. That's why you have not heard a lot of conversation or discussion about it. The second problem that we have is that our immigration laws are only as good as our ability to enforce those laws. And if you want to get to the heart of the problem that we're facing here in terms of opposition to the bill, it's because in the past, Both Republicans and Democrats have promised to enforce the immigration laws and then have refused or been unable to do it. Now, part of that has just been an unwillingness, to be quite frank. You talk about 1986, you talk about 2006, you talk about other efforts. In the past, people have been told we're going to enforce the immigration laws, and then they don't do it. So as time goes on and the problem gets bigger, people look at Washington and say, you told us this before, so you're not going to do it again. And that really is standing in the way of more support for this measure. But the other problem we have is that the systems we use to enforce the law are broken themselves. For example, on the border, there are sectors that have dramatically improved, and so from that experience we have learned what works. But there are sectors that have actually gotten worse or have not improved significantly. And so to say that the entire border has been, on the southern border, has been secured is not true. And we really shouldn't say that to Americans, who, especially those living near that border, who understand that that's not true. We also, by the way, have a problem with visa overstays. What that means is people come into the United States legally on a tourist visa or some other visa, and then the visa, when it expires, they don't leave. So they came in legally, they didn't jump a fence or cross the border, but then they get here and they stay. And that's a visa overstay. That's 40% of our problem. And the third, so we don't have a system to track that. Even though it's mandated by law, we do not have a system to track that. We track people when they come in, but we don't track them when they leave in real time, and so we don't have a running tally of who has overstayed their visas, leading to 40% of our illegal immigration problem. And the third problem that we have is that the magnet that brings people here. Now, I'm not saying to you that everybody that comes here, every single person that comes here illegally is coming looking for jobs and opportunity. But I'm telling you that the enormous majority of people that come here are coming because they believe there's a job in the United States for them and so they can feed their families. And that's a magnet. You have jobs and you have people willing to do those jobs. Those two things are going to meet. They are going to come. And the choice we have is, do they come through a legal process that is organized and counts who they are and is secure, or do they come in a chaotic way that contributes to illegal immigration? And that's how they're coming now. And so that's why in this bill we have an entry-exit tracking system, but we also have something called E-Verify. What E-Verify simply means is that employers, any business, any company, anyone who hires someone, when you go hire them, you have to ask them their name, they have to produce their identification, you run that name through the Internet on a system called E-Verify, and it will confirm whether that person is legally here or not. And if you hire them after that system says they're illegally here, we double and sometimes even triple the penalties for employers that do that. So those are important measures that this bill takes. And that's the second problem that we face. The third problem that we face is even more fundamental. And that is that as we speak, as I stand here before you today, estimates are that there are upwards of 11 million human beings living in these United States who are here illegally. They've overstayed visas, they were brought as children, they've crossed the border, they are here. They don't qualify for welfare, they don't qualify for any federal benefits, but they are here. They are here and they are working. They are working for cash. They are working under someone else's identification, but they are here. The vast majority of them have been here for longer than a decade. They're here. And let me tell you, that's not good for them, because when you don't have documents, you're unprotected. When you're here illegally, you can be exploited, and that happens. But it's also not good for the country. It is not good for this country to have that many people here. We don't know who they are. They're not paying taxes. They're working, but they're not paying taxes. We have no idea. The vast majority of them are not criminals, but a handful of them are. We don't know that. We don't know where they live, where they are, who they are, how long they've been here. We know very little about them. And that's not good for our country either. We have to deal with that. And that was my point. If we don't do anything, let's say this bill fails, or let's say we pass it and the House doesn't do it, or let's say we decide not to do anything at all on immigration. All those things that I've just described to you, they stay in place. If we don't do anything, the border stays the way it is, we still don't have E-Verify, we still don't have an entry-exit tracking system, and we still have no idea who these 11 million people are, and we still do not have a legal immigration system that works. That's what happens if we do nothing. And so that's why I got involved in this issue. It isn't politics, and I disagree with my colleagues that have said that this is about politics. This is not about saving the Republican Party or anybody else. This is about correcting something that is hurting the United States of America. I can certainly tell you it's not about my personal politics, because this is an issue that makes a lot of people unhappy. A lot of people that have supported me and support me now, people who I agree with on every other issue, on every other issue. You pull out a list of issues facing this country, I agree with them on every other issue. But they disagree with me on this issue. And I respect and understand why. Because they're frustrated. Because they've been told in the past that this is going to get fixed and it hasn't. Because they feel and see and know that this is the most generous country in the world on immigration and it's been taken advantage of. And they're frustrated by it. I've seen some describe the opponents of immigration reform as haters and anti-Hispanic and anti-immigrant. That's just not true. It's not true. These are people that are just frustrated that the laws have not been followed and they don't want to reward it. And I do understand that. And what I would say to them is, look, I get it. I don't like this either. I don't like the fact that we have 11 million people here illegally. I don't like the fact that people have ignored our laws and crossed our borders or overstayed visas. I don't like it either. But that's what we're going to get stuck with if we don't do anything about it. And that's what this bill tries to do. And let me explain how it does it. First it says, first we outline, because when we filed this bill, what we said is the Department of Homeland Security, here's $6.5 billion, go out and design a border fence plan and a border plan, submit it to Congress, issue a letter of commencement, and then you can begin the process of identifying these people that are here illegally. That was our bill. And then I went around my state, sometimes the country, and my colleagues did as well, and people told us, look, we don't trust the Department of Homeland Security. These people say that the border's already secure, and you're going to tell them to design a plan? And I thought that was a good point. And so now we have an amendment before us by Senator Hoeven and Corker that actually defines the plan. And let me describe this new plan to you, because I think it is the most substantial border security plan that we have ever had before any body of Congress. Number one, it mandates. It doesn't say you can, it doesn't say you should, it says you must. You must have universal E-Verify for every business in America, and you have to wrap that up within 4 years. It starts with the big businesses until it gets to ag and the small businesses. The reason why you need 3 to 4 years is because a really small business is going to take them time to buy the technology to do this. That's number one. Number two, it says you have to finish the entry-exit tracking system. And after this bill was amended in committee, it says that eventually the 30 major international airports in this country will have it biometrically, this entry-exit tracking system. The third thing it says is you have to deploy upwards of $3 billion in technology. This is technology that wasn't around in 1986. This was technology that wasn't around in 2006. Let me describe that technology. Radars, sensors on the ground, night vision goggles, motion detectors, even unarmed drones, things that allow you to see people. And even if they get past you at the first stop on the border, you can follow them and then apprehend them a few miles down the road. This technology didn't used to exist anymore. We go further than that in the amendment. We don't just say you have to deploy this technology. We tell you where you have to deploy it. We don't even leave that to DHS. And those ideas didn't come from senators. It came from members of the Border Patrol on the front lines. They have told us, here's where we need this stuff. So in a level of detail unprecedented in the history of this body, we actually say, 50 goggles in this sector, 100 radars in this sector. That's the third thing that this bill requires you to do. The fourth thing that it requires you to do is to double the size of the Border Patrol, adding 20,000 new border agents. This is a dramatic increase in the number of people because, cameras and sensors are great, but if you don't have people to actually do the apprehension, it doesn't work. 20,000 new border agents. And the last thing it says is you have to complete this fencing. And that includes where it's practical, where it's possible, getting rid of these vehicle barriers, because one of the things they did with the fencing is they would put up some barrier on the road and say that's a fence. The problem is that may keep a vehicle, but it doesn't keep somebody from climbing over it. We actually say that where it's possible, where the terrain allows it, there are places where the terrain doesn't let you build a fence, but where the terrain allows it, you have to put a fence there. In some places, the fence is double, especially in urban areas. It's been very successful in San Diego. These are 5 things that we require. We don't say you can, you might, you must. You must do these 5 things before anyone who has violated our immigration laws can even apply for permanent residency, permanent legal residency in the United States of America. 10 years from now, by the way. And one of the criticisms people have said is this bill is legalization first. It's not that simple. Legalization in the way that real legalization is permanent legalization, is what we call a green card. You have to have a green card before you can apply to become a citizen of the United States. Under this bill, illegal immigrants cannot get a green card, cannot even apply for a green card until 10 years have passed. And these 5 things I've just described, E-Verify, entry-exit tracking system, full technology implementation, 20,000 new border agents, finishing the fence, all 5 of those things have to happen. People say, well, why are you linking the 2 things? Here's the answer. Because of the problems we had in the past. The only way we can make sure that a future president or a future Congress doesn't go back on these promises is if we tie it to something we know people want. And that's why they're linked. And so no one who's here illegally, they cannot apply for that permanent residency until these 5 things happen. And that's the trigger that's going to guarantee that this happens. The argument is, though, legalization first because you are allowing the people who are here illegally now to stay in the meantime. And let me tell you the problem with that issue. The problem with that issue, first of all, we're talking about 11 million people that are already here. Okay, they're already here. We're not talking about 11 million new people. We're not talking about people that are outside the country that might come in the meantime. We're talking about people that are already here. More than half of them have been here longer than a decade. That means the chances are they have children that are U.S. citizens. They're definitely working because somehow they're eating. They don't qualify for federal benefits because we don't even know who they are. Okay? They're already here. You have to do something about them in the meantime. You can't build a fence and you can't hire 20,000 border agents in 6 weeks. It takes a little bit of time. It doesn't take 10 years, but it takes some time to do that. And so here's what we do. We say if you are illegally here and you've been here for long, it couldn't have come last week or even last year. You've been here for a while and you're illegally here, you have to come forward. You're going to have to pass a national security background check. You're going to have to pass a criminal background check. You're going to have to pay a fine because you broke the law. You're going to have to start paying taxes and working. And the only thing you get, to the extent you get something, the only thing you get is you get a work permit that allows you to do 3 things: work, travel, and pay taxes. When you get this work permit, you do not qualify. You do not qualify for food stamps. You don't qualify for welfare. You don't qualify for Obamacare subsidies. You don't qualify for any of these things. People may say, well, we're rewarding them. But I want people to think about this for a second. They're already here. They're already working. We're not going to round up and deport 11 million people, so it's basically de facto amnesty. The only thing that's going to change in their lives is they're going to start paying taxes, they're going to have to pay a fine, and we're going to know who they are. And by the way, this work permit is not permanent. It expires every 6 years. So if you come forward and get this work permit, which is temporary, in 6 years you've got to go back and apply for it again. If it's not renewed because you've broken a condition, you're illegally here. But now we know who you are, and you won't be able to find a job because of E-Verify. And when you go back and renew it after 6 years, you're going to have to pass another background check, pay another fine, pay another application fee, and you're going to have to prove that in the previous 6 years you've been here working and paying taxes. You're going to have to prove that you're self-sustaining, that you're not dependent. This whole time you don't qualify to apply for permanent status, not to mention citizenship. And after 10 years have gone by in this status, not 10 years after the passage of the bill, 10 years after you, the applicant, has been in this status, then and only if those 5 things I talked about, E-Verify, entry-exit tracking system, the technology plan, the border fence, and the 20,000 new agents, only if those 5 things have happened, then you can apply for a green card through the green card process. That's another mistake people are making. They think, all right, 10 years are here, you made the 5 conditions, they're going to hand you a green card. Not true. You can apply for it. It isn't awarded to you. Now, is this perfect? I don't think this problem has a perfect solution. But I can tell you, if we don't do anything, let's suppose immigration reform fails. Suppose we do nothing. You're still going to have the 11 million people here. We're still not going to know who they are. They're still not going to be paying taxes. They're still not going to have undergone a background check. And you won't have E-Verify, you won't have border security, you won't have the agents, you won't have the technology, you won't have the entry-exit tracking system, you won't have any of that. Life is about choices. Legislating is about choices. And the choice can't be between what you wish things were like and this bill. The choice is between the way things are and this bill, or some alternative to it. And again, if we defeat it, then we're stuck with what we have. And what we have is a disaster. It's a disaster. And I want to make clear another point. People say, boy, all this border security is overkill, so much stuff. Look, the United States is a special country. That's why people want to come here. 1 million people a year come here legally. 1 million people a year. There's no other country in the world that comes close to that. You understand what that means? Other countries, they don't want people coming, or people don't want to go. When was the last time you heard of a boatload of American refugees arriving on the shores of another country? People want to come here. We understand that. In fact, this country is so special that there are people that are willing to risk their lives to come here. And willing to come illegally to come here. We're compassionate. Our heart breaks when we hear stories about that. But I also have to remind people that we're also a sovereign country. Every country in the world secures their border or tries to. Many of the countries that people come here from secure their border, sometimes viciously. We're not advocating that. We have a right as a sovereign country to secure our border. We have a right to do that. And while we're compassionate, no one has a right to come here illegally. And so I would just close by saying, I know that this is a tough issue. I do. I really do. I understand that on the one side, there are the human stories of people that you have met. And this issue really changes when you meet somebody. One thing is to read about 11 million people that are here illegally. Another one is to meet one of them. A father, a mother, a son or a daughter, someone who you know as a human being. And you know about their hopes and dreams and how much they're struggling. One thing is to know about that. It changes your perspective on it. But I also understand the frustration that people have, that they've heard all these promises before, that people have violated our laws, they've ignored them, and that's wrong, and we shouldn't reward it. I do. But ultimately, I ran for the Senate because I wanted to make a difference. I know I could have just stayed back on this issue and come to the floor, and not making it as a criticism of anybody else, but that I could have just come to the floor and offered up what I would have done instead and be critical of efforts that others were making. That was an option for me. But I couldn't stand it. I could not stand to see how this problem is hurting our country and leave it the way that it is. How is this good for us? We have to do something about this. And that's what we're trying to do here. And with this new amendment, we will do more for border security than anyone has ever tried to do before. And all I would ask my colleagues and members of the public is to think about that. Think about it. What do you want? Do you want things to stay the way they are, or do you want to try to fix it? And I would just say to you, our country desperately needs to fix it. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Montana.
Mr. President, I asked to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, just outside this chamber is a bust of President Theodore Roosevelt. When I walk past it, I'm often reminded of one of my favorite TR quotes, which is, "Far and away the best prize that life has to offer is a chance to work hard at work worth doing." For the past 3 years, I've been working with my colleagues on the Senate Finance Committee on comprehensive tax reform. It's been hard work. It's certainly been work worth doing. We've had more than 30 hearings. We've heard from hundreds of experts about how tax reform can simplify the system for families, help businesses innovate, and make the U.S. more competitive. Our efforts have been ramping up over the past several weeks, and we are starting to build momentum. Senator Hatch and I have been working very closely with members of the Finance Committee on a series of 10 discussion papers examining key aspects of the tax code. Each of the discussion papers is a different aspect of the code. It began back in March with a discussion on, quote, simplifying the system for families and businesses. And there have been 9 others. We then met as a full committee every week that the Senate has been in session to go through different topics. presenting a range of options and sitting around the table asking questions of staff, what about this and that, and the questions of each other. It's very informative and a process that's bringing us even closer together, establishing trust and confidence in what we're doing and learning a lot more about what the code is and is not. We concluded these meetings this morning with a discussion on non-income tax issues. For example, payroll taxes and excise taxes, that is non-income taxes. The meetings have been very beneficial. We're building trust and getting everyone's buy-in. I also speak weekly with the Treasury Secretary about tax reform, getting his ideas and what seems to make sense for him and for the administration. And I've been working for quite some time with my counterpart in the House, Chairman David Camp. In fact, we have been meeting weekly, Chairman Camp and I, face-to-face for more than a year now, discussing matters that apply to the Finance Committee as well as Ways and Means, but especially tax reform, because he's working just as hard on his side over that other body. Our shared goal is to make the code more simple, to make it more fair for families, to spark a more prosperous economy. I believe very strongly if we can simplify the code as well as some other measures that need to be taken, people will feel better about it. They'll not think that the other guy's got a big loophole that he can't take advantage of. It'll just kind of help people feel better about themselves, and it'll certainly help small businesses because the code is so complex for small business, and I think that'll in of itself help create some innovation, some entrepreneurship, and energy for more jobs. Together, Chairman Camp and I also recently launched a website. It's called taxreform.gov, and the site will enable us to get even more ideas and to hear directly from the American people, not people in Washington, D.C., but around the country. People all around can tell us what they think. We want to know what people think, what they think the nation's tax system should look like, how we can make families' lives easier, and how we can ensure a less burdensome tax code. We've received a lot of hits, if you will, to the website. Over 30,000 so far, 10,000 submissions, that is, ideas people have, and it's from every state in the nation. People are overwhelmingly, I must tell you, if you were to categorize what's the character of the submissions, overwhelmingly they're calling for a much more simple code. People want the code a lot more simple. It's too complex. For example, a fellow named David from Redmond, Washington wrote, and I'm quoting him, "I'm a retired lawyer, and I can't prepare my own tax returns." Why? Because of the technical, incomprehensible language of the code, he says, and I commend you and hope you are successful. That's just an example. And Richard from my hometown in Helena, Montana, noted that the current code is outdated, does not work effectively or efficiently, and he said, quote, just needs to be more simple, more effective, and more fair. Again, another representative submission. I think well, Richard and David hit the nail on the head over and over. That's what we're hearing. Simple, effective, and fair. Chairman Camp and I are going to be making a big push this coming weeks to further engage colleagues here in Washington, but as well as people all across America. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to travel. We're going to travel to other cities, Chairman Camp and I, together. We're going to travel outside of Washington, D.C., where the real Americans reside, and we're going to talk to individuals. We're going to talk to families, business owners, big and small, just hear directly what people have in mind. And again, we're doing this because we want to hear directly from American people, not just people in Washington, D.C. And we'll be announcing our first visit outside of Washington, D.C. Next week. We want to hear what people think. Momentum is building. Now is the time to do reform, and I might say, Mr. President, in my view, if we can't get tax reform passed in this Congress, I don't think we'll ever be able to address the issue for maybe 3 years. I doubt that we'll do it next Congress because that will be a presidential election year, and have to wait till there's a new president. It's going to take a long time, and that's critically dangerous because last time the code was significantly reformed was 1986. And the world's changed dramatically since 1986. The code's just too dated. And I might say this, Mr. President, since 1986, the last time the tax code was reformed, there have been 15,000 changes to the code. 15,000. And no wonder it's complex. No wonder people want it more simple and more fair. I think that working together that we in Congress can improve the code and update it for the 21st century. And it comes down to working together. It comes down to building trust, both sides of the aisle, both bodies, and because it's going to help American people when we do reform the code in this Congress. I don't know how many months it's going to take, but we're going to do all we can. As Teddy Roosevelt said, hard work is worth doing if it's for a good cause, and this is clearly hard work, I can tell you that, but it's also for a good cause. I yield the floor. Suggested up the quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
President.
Republican whip.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I know things are speeding at the, seem like they're speeding by us at the speed of light on this bill. We've got an announcement of a breakthrough on the part of some of our colleagues that is going to give this bill the momentum to pass and come out of here with a bunch of votes. But I think there's some questions that we need to ask. First of all, I see the distinguished chairman of the Finance Committee. I know he's probably looked at this, but the underlying bill provides that $8.3 billion is immediately appropriated as emergency spending to fund the trust fund that will fund at least some of the operations in this immigration reform bill. But when I started to look at it a little more closely and consider the fact that even though the underlying bill had zero funds for new Border Patrol, this new bill, this new proposal, I should say, that we have yet to see, supposedly it's going to come around 6 o'clock, has an additional 20,000 Border Patrol. 20,000 Border Patrol. That's doubling the size of the Border Patrol. Senator Hoeven, the distinguished senator from North Dakota, said earlier in response to a question I asked him, that would cost an additional $30 billion. So you have $8.3 billion, if my arithmetic's correct, $30 billion, that's $38 billion. And I noticed here on page 48 of the Congressional Budget Office cost estimate, the CBO estimates that implementing this bill, the underlying bill, would result in net discretionary costs of about $22 billion more. And that's starting to be real money, it seems to me. $60 billion. I know we were, as a result of the Budget Control Act, we've been having some spirited debates here about whether the $85 or so billion that was sequestered under the Budget Control Act was something we could live without or not, or it had to be made up through additional revenue. But this strikes me as very significant that we're talking about $60 billion of additional deficit spending or additional spending adding to the deficit, which has not been paid for, if my numbers are correct. And I would welcome anyone else to come help me out, figure that out. Now, one of the rationales as I was talking to our colleagues, they looked at the original score and said that this actually generates additional revenue because people who come out of the shadows and are working will begin to pay Social Security taxes. But the $211 billion in the score is Social Security trust fund money, which of course must someday be paid in terms of benefits to these very same people. And so what it appears is there is a double counting going on here. Our colleagues are saying, hey, we've got additional revenue here because of the negative score, but that is money that's going to require an IOU to the Social Security Trust Fund and will have to be paid back at some point in the future. So as Senator Sessions, the ranking member of the Senate Budget Committee, pointed out, the on-budget deficit will increase by $14.2 billion. And that's before you add the additional $30 billion for 20,000 Border Patrol and $22 billion in additional spending to fund this underlying bill. So my only point, Mr. President, is I think we need to take a deep breath, and first we need to read the bill, read the proposal that's coming out supposedly at 6 o'clock. But already there's talk about what's the end game here in the Senate, and that potentially the majority leader will file cloture on this Corker-Hoven amendment, and then we'll have a vote on Monday or maybe Tuesday. I just think it's extraordinarily important when you're talking about numbers like this and a bill this big that we take our time and we're careful and we know exactly what the impact is on the bill. Because if in fact what is happening is double counting, which is my suspicion based on my review of the CBO documentation, that's a serious matter indeed, because that money is going to need to be paid back. On another but related note, I would say, Mr. President, we've been told that this surge that's going to be funded under the Corker-Hoven amendment and the additional 20,000 Border Patrol agents and a whole bunch of new technology and other assets, that this will be sufficient to secure our borders and make illegal immigration a thing of the past. We've been told that supporters of the bill welcome a robust and extensive debate over its provisions. And then when we look at the way this is happening, where people are announcing breakthroughs, people are saying, well, I'm going to co-sponsor that, only to find out the bill itself hasn't even been written or released. It seems to me we've got the cart ahead of the horse, and we better be careful about what we're doing. We have members of the chamber calling for a vote this weekend on an as yet unreleased amendment. And I know I, for one, and others I suspect would like to read it and know what's in it. I commend our colleagues, and I mean this in all sincerity, for trying to do their best to improve this bill. But I worry that their solution amounts to throwing more money at the problem without any real system of accountability. You know, we've talked about how important it is to have inputs into the bill, but really what we all want is results or outputs. And what we have under this amendment, as I understand it, and as I ask the distinguished senators from Tennessee and North Dakota, they conceded that because our colleagues on the other side of the aisle object to any sort of contingency between the probationary status and legal permanent residency based on accomplishing the situational awareness requirements in the underlying bill or operational control, because they object to that, then all we have are more promises about future performance. And I must say our record of promises, keeping our promises when it comes to immigration reform, are beyond pathetic. Starting back in 1986 with the amnesty and promise of enforcement. Then we know in 1996 where, as I mentioned earlier, President Clinton signed a requirement of a biometric entry-exit system which has still not been deployed at the exits at airports and seaports. Even though the 9/11 Commission noted that some of the terrorists who killed 3,000 Americans on September the 11th, 2001, that some of them included people who came into the country legally but simply overstayed their visa, and we lost track of them because we had no effective entry-exit system. And the 9/11 Commission said this is something we need to fix. And that was 2001. Still hadn't been done. Until today, our colleagues on the so-called Gang of Eight argued that it was too expensive and too impractical to add even 5,000 Border Patrol agents to say nothing of 20,000 agents. And as I pointed out earlier in questioning, asking some questions of my colleague or distinguished colleagues, Senator McCain from Arizona, Senator Schumer, the senior senator from New York, it's amazing how quickly their tune changed. When their underlying bill had 0 Border Patrol, when my amendment had 5,000 Border Patrol, they said that's a budget buster. Only imagine my surprise when their amendment comes out with 20,000 Border Patrol, doubling the Border Patrol, $30 billion. Well, I would really like to know whether the proposals that are being made here have been sufficiently vetted. I don't know exactly what all of these new Border Patrol are going to be doing. And while I think it's important that we get the advice of the experts in terms of what sort of new technology can be deployed here, I worry that by being overly prescriptive about both the number of the boots on the ground and the technology that they're going to use, that we're going to freeze in place legislatively a solution that will quickly become antiquated and become inefficient. That's why I prefer and why I think is much more, much better is an output or a result metric that we can look at. And let the experts, let the Border Patrol, let the Department of Homeland Security, let the technology experts who've developed great technology that we've already paid for and deployed in places like Iraq and Afghanistan through the Department of Defense, let them advise us and the Border Patrol what they need in order to accomplish the goals, in order to meet the mark. Let's not let a bunch of generalists like us who are not expert in this field and not prescribe this solution for a 10-year period of time when it will become quickly outdated. So from everything I've heard, Mr. President, and everything I've read, and I think it was confirmed by the senators this afternoon, the Hoeven-Corker amendment creates a border security trigger based on inputs rather than outputs. And it is, I think, accurate to say it is aspirational. In other words, they promise to try to meet those goals. But 10 years from now, I dare say half of the members of this chamber won't even be here. Since 2007, we've had 43 new United States senators since 2007. So the promises we make today in exchange for extraordinary generosity toward the 11 million people to provide them an opportunity to gain probationary status and then potentially earn legal permanent residency and citizenship, that extraordinary offer made in the underlying bill, we have no idea whether the border security, the entry-exit system, or the E-Verify will actually work and accomplish the goals that we all hope they will accomplish. So we're asked to, once again, Washington saying, trust me, trust us. We mean well. We're going to try. But you know what? We have no means to compel the bureaucracy and the executive branch to actually do what we say they should do here, which is why we need a trigger, a hard trigger, to realign the incentives so that all of us, from the left to the right, Republicans and Democrats, we all join together in putting the focus on the problem like a laser and making the bureaucracy hit those objectives. So we've promised a lot of things. We've had 27 years of inputs into our immigration system since the 1986 amnesty, and we still don't have secure borders. 350,000 plus people detained at the southwestern border last year. GAO says we have about 45% operational control of the border, so who knows how many people actually made their way across, although we do know among those that have come across and were detained came from 100 different countries, including state sponsors of international terrorism. I'm not suggesting there's massive incursions of terrorists coming from other countries. I'm saying that the same porous borders that will allow people to come into this country from other countries around the world can be exploited by our enemies, and it's a national security issue. Now, when I go home to Texas, people tell me they simply don't trust the federal government when it comes to securing our borders. And why would they? Based on the historical experience, there's no reason for them to do so. 3 decades of broken promises have destroyed Washington's credibility. And the only way to regain that credibility is to demand real results on border security and create a mechanism that incentivizes all of us to make sure that it happens. I'm afraid that this amendment, the Corker-Hoven amendment, no matter how well-intentioned, and I do believe it is well-intentioned, everyone's eager to find a solution to the broken immigration system, including me. The status quo is unacceptable, benefits no one. But in the rush to try to come up with something that seems good at the moment, in failing to take the care to look at the detail, whether it's financial or it's whether it will actually produce results, based on text we haven't even seen yet, I think we're rushing to judgment here, and I think it's something we ought to reconsider. Mr. President, looking beyond border security, I'm eager to know whether the proposed amendment includes other issues that were contained in my amendment that was tabled earlier today, because I know that speaking to Senator Hoven, Senator Corker, they did include a border security component, but as I understand it, there are other senators who are coming to them and saying, we want to be included in your amendment. So we don't know what subjects are also included in that amendment, but I'd like to know whether it includes things like, does it prohibit illegal immigrants with multiple drunk driving convictions from receiving legal status? What about people who've been guilty of multiple instances of domestic violence? What about immigrants who fall into one of those categories and have already been deported? Believe it or not, under the underlying bill, people can have actually been deported for committing a misdemeanor and be eligible to re-enter the country and register for RPI status. I think that would be shocking to most people if they think about it, if they knew about it. Under the Gang of Eight bill, all of the people I just described are available for immediate registered provisional immigrant status. Earlier this year, I mentioned a remarkable statistic, at least it is to me. In fiscal year 2011, Customs and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, deported nearly 36,000 people with DUI convictions, driving under the influence. I challenge any member of this chamber to come down to the floor and explain why drunk drivers and people who've committed domestic violence should be eligible for immediate probationary status. I doubt anyone will take me up on that challenge, because who would want to defend the indefensible? As I've said before, and I'll conclude my comments with this because I see other senators on the floor who want to speak. As I said before, the American people are generous. They are compassionate. But they don't want to, it's the old adage, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. They don't want to be fooled again when it comes to unkept promises in fixing our broken immigration system. I know we're committed to finding a reasonable and responsible and humane way to solve the problem of illegal immigration, but we should never, ever grant legal status to people with multiple drunk driving or domestic violence convictions. And I don't know, but I will certainly be careful to read and learn whether the proposed alternative to the amendment that was tabled earlier today contains some of these provisions that were in the tabled amendment. If they don't, we will be filing, we have filed separate amendments which we will urge a up or down vote on. Mr. President,